Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. In today's video, I'm taking my first way too early look at the 2026 US Senate map and going through each and every state, just reading a little bit about them and also giving my race characterization for them at this time. So the way this is going to go is I'm going to go through each Senate race. I'm going to go in alphabetical order, starting with the state of Alabama. I'll quickly look at some election results for Alabama and just give you my quick thoughts on it. So for example, in Alabama, this is a Republican incumbent Senator Tommy Tuberville. He has stated that he does plan to run for re-election. He was elected back in 2020 for the first time, and I'll give you a look at 2020 where Tuberville defeated then Democratic incumbent Doug Jones by about 20.4%. This race is really not going to be too competitive. I fully expect Alabama will be a safe Republican state, safe meaning over 15% margin of victory. This has the Democrats at 34, Republicans at 32. Next, we have the state of Alaska. This is Republican incumbent Dan Sullivan. This one would be interesting if a prominent Democrat like Mary Peltola were to run for this seat. You could see this race get more competitive. Right now, there hasn't been any rumors on any Democratic candidates running for Senate yet on the Alaska side. I don't even believe there's been any confirmed reports that Dan Sullivan is running it either. So this race potentially could be the incumbent running for re-election or an open race. We're going to have to wait and see on that. As for how the race went back, that's a presidential map. I'm looking for this one right here. As for the race went in 2020, we did see Dan Sullivan win this race by about 12.7%. And when you look at how it went in the presidential race in 2024, Alaska voted for Donald Trump by about 14%. So somewhere just a bit shy of 15% seems to be where Alaska seems to vote at both of the Senate level and presidential level. So with that, I'm going to put Alaska into the likely Republican column. Likely is anywhere between 5 and 15%. 15% or over would be safe. So Alaska is just by the thinnest of margins in the likely Republican column. This puts Republicans at 33, Democrats are at 34. Now for the state of Colorado, this is one-term Democratic Senator John Hickenlooper, who won the seat in 2020, defeating Republican incumbent Cory Gardner. He has stated he does have plans to run for re-election in this election, and he's also further stated this will be his last term. So if he holds to his word, this will be 2 terms for him in the U.S. Senate and will not run for a 3rd term if he does win. There have not been any reported Republican candidates running against him at this time. But looking back at 2020, Hickenlooper did win this race by about 9.3% against a Republican incumbent. And I would imagine that, obviously, given he has the incumbency advantage this time around, I think he would likely exceed on this margin of victory. And looking at the presidential race, Colorado ended up going for Kamala Harris over Donald Trump by about 11 points. So in between 9 and 11 points certainly suggests Colorado is more likely going to be a likely Democratic state than one that's going to be too competitive. So right now, Colorado goes as likely Democrat. This puts the Democrats at 35, Republicans at 33. Now we come to the state of Georgia. This is going to be one of the closest races in the entire country in 2026. This is Democratic incumbent Senator Jon Ossoff running for a 2nd term. He was elected in the 2021 runoff election against David Perdue. He got about 50.6% of the vote, I'll show you. Ossoff won by 1.2%, 50.62 to Purdue's 49.38. And this race is expected to be one of the closest in the country, as again, Ossoff won by just about 1.2% back in 2020. In 2024, Donald Trump won the state of Georgia by just about 2%. So it is a very, very close race in the last 2 elections, both at the presidential level and the Senate level. And it is also worth noting, this race is going to be very, very tight in that it is potentially Republican Governor Brian Kemp might be running for this seat in Georgia. And if he does run for this seat, Kemp, who so far has run statewide for governor twice, and I believe for Secretary of State before that, he's been a very formidable Republican in the state of Georgia. So that would be one of the more formidable Democrats in the state going up against one of the most formidable Republicans in the state. It would make for a very interesting matchup and definitely one that's going to be very, very competitive. As for how Georgia goes right now, I think I'm going under the assumption it's Kemp versus Ossoff. This one's going to be very, very tight. I think Brian Kemp narrowly wins this race by under 1% of the vote against Jon Ossoff. If it is not Brian Kemp, if Kemp does not run, then it'll be Ossoff versus another Republican. I would have the race start off as a toss-up. Maybe you could make the argument for tilt Democrat, but I think in an Ossoff versus Kemp race, I do think Kemp starts off as a very narrow favorite to win this race. This puts the Democrats at 35, Republicans at 34. Georgia is truly going to come down to the wire in 2026, certainly capable of going to either party. Now for the state of Idaho, this will be three-term Republican incumbent Jim Risch. I don't believe he's announced if he is running yet or not, but Idaho is certainly going to be a Republican state. There was a 29.4% win in 2020. The presidential level this time around was about a 27% win as well. This one is all but certain going to be a Republican-held seat. Idaho goes, and now we go to the state of Illinois, where five-term Democratic incumbent Dick Durbin was reelected in 2020. Durbin has filed paperwork to run for reelection, and it would certainly look like he is going to run. And if he does run, it's more likely than not he is going to win. As back in 2020, Durbin won by about 16.1%. The presidential election did get a bit closer in 2024. Harris won by 11%. So somewhere between 11 and 16, that's right on the margin of being a likely or safe Democratic state. I'm going to err more on the incumbency side of things in a more Democratic, supposed to be Democratic wave year, giving Illinois to Durbin in the safe margin. This will put Democrats at 36, Republicans would be at 35. Now the state of Iowa, two-term Republican Joni Ernst is up for re-election. She has announced she does plan to run for a third term. However, it has been speculated by some that Ernst could potentially face a Republican primary challenger from the more right side, MAGA side of the party, following the situation with how she's handling the Pete Hegseth for Secretary of Defense hearings. So this could potentially be one at the primary level that could get very, very interesting. As for how this race goes at the general election level, well, back in 2020, Ernst won by about 6.5%. The presidential level ended up being Trump winning by 13%. So both of these, in both instances, is under 15% of the vote. So I would err on the side of Iowa being a likely Republican state, whether Ernst is the nominee or not. I do think she's probably going to be the Republican nominee for Senate, but I think Iowa goes in the likely Republican column. Now, for Kansas and its Senate race, this is one-term Republican Roger Marshall, I believe he's the former governor of Kansas. He was elected in 2020, and there's some speculation the Democratic governor of Kansas might run against Marshall. However, she has stated recently that she does not intend to run for this seat. So with that, without a prominent Democrat running in Kansas, looking like more likely than not it will be a Democrat or Republican win. The Republican Marshall won last time 11.4% margin of victory. The presidential race in 2024, Trump won by about 16%. So Kansas looking like it will be a Republican win. The question will be the margin in which it'll be done. I am going to say it is a safe Republican state because I don't think there will be a strong Democratic candidate, but that still remains to be seen. In the state of Kentucky, this is going to be an interesting one because this is seven-term Republican and outgoing Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell. McConnell retired as leader after the 2024 elections, but says he plans to serve out the remainder of his term, leading to some speculation that he will not run. If McConnell does choose to retire and not run again, former Kentucky Attorney General and 2023 Republican governor nominee Daniel Cameron has been widely speculated as a potential candidate for the Republicans, as well as Representative Thomas Massie of Kentucky's 4th District. On the Democratic side, there really aren't too many people talked about being potential candidates other than Governor Andy Beshear, who, even though there was some speculation he might seek the seat, he's not stated whether or not he will do so, actually saying he would likely not run for this seat, potentially fueling some speculation Beshear would like to run for president on the Democratic side in 2028. And so without a strong Democratic challenger in Kentucky, McConnell won here by 19.5% back in 2020. On the presidential race, Trump won the state by over 30 points in 2024. I think whether it's McConnell or Cameron, I think this race does end up going safe Republican in Kentucky. Now looking at Louisiana, this is two-term Republican Bill Cassidy, who was reelected in 2020. And it says here on Wikipedia, where I'm reading this, Louisiana State Treasurer and former U.S. Representative John Fleming has announced a primary campaign against Cassidy. John Bel Edwards, the former former governor of Louisiana, is a potential Democratic candidate. So this is a very interesting one where Louisiana does have an open primary system. So Cassidy might actually be more vulnerable to a Republican primary challenger than some others. I'm not sure if he will be primaried, but it will be interesting to see how this one does end up going. But back in 2020, Cassidy did win by about 40 points. At the presidential race in 2024, Trump won here by about 22 points. So it's looking more likely than not, no matter who the nominee is in Louisiana, it will be a Republican win, and I would expect that it probably will be Cassidy, but this is going to be a close one to watch for going forward. Now Republicans have 39, Democrats have 36. We come to the state of Maine. Maine's a very, very interesting one because this is Republican incumbent Susan Collins, who you may remember in 2020 won a very close race by just about 8.6% when several of the polls showed her in danger of losing this race. Collins did very well on election day performing, getting above 50% on the first ballot in Maine, which is very hard for a Republican to do, and winning this race. Maine is undoubtedly going to be one of the top targets for the Democrats trying to flip a seat in 2024. I believe this is the only Republican senator up in a Senate seat in 2026 in a state that Kamala Harris won in 2024. So Maine, Susan Collins will absolutely be a top target. She has confirmed she is running for a 6th term. And U.S. Representative for Maine's 1st Congressional District, this is the more Democratic of the two districts in Maine, Shelley Pingree is considering a run for the Senate seat. I think any Democrat running against Susan Collins is going to be a very, very close race. Of course, Susan Collins being from Maine, she's very popular with moderates and independents, maybe not so much with a more MAGA wing of the Republican Party, but certainly with independents, she has shown some popularity. And given her incumbency advantage and being a 5-term Republican senator, I do think Susan Collins holds on, but I do think it'll be closer than 2020. I think she wins in the lean margin right now, likely under 5% of the vote, but more than 1%. I think right now I'd have Collins narrowly winning by about 4 to 4.5 percentage points. This puts Republicans at 40, Democrats at 36. Now to the state of Massachusetts, where 2-term Democratic incumbent Ed Markey, who was reelected back in 2020. Actually, before I do that, I don't know if I showed off. I know I showed the race for Maine on the Senate level. I don't think I showed the presidential race. It was a 7-point race between Harris and Trump statewide in Maine in 2024. So for a Republican candidate up as the incumbent, this could potentially be a good sign for Collins' chances. Now back to the 2026 map. Massachusetts, Ed Markey is up for re-election. He has announced he is running for a 3rd full term. If Markey does win, he would be 80 years old on election day if he's reelected to another 6-year term. The only Republican right now listed as potentially being a Republican candidate could be former governor of Massachusetts, Charlie Baker. If he were to run, that would make this race a little bit more interesting. But we did see in Maryland with Larry Hogan running against the Democratic candidate Angela Brooks. Just because you were a former governor that was very popular in the state does not guarantee victory. Hogan lost the seat by a little under 10 points, I believe, or a little over 10 points. So it's not going to be exactly a win for the Republicans if Baker does run, but that would make things a lot more competitive. Other Republicans from Massachusetts I can think of is John Deaton, who just ran for Senate against Elizabeth Warren, although I would eye him more for a governor's race run in Massachusetts. Based on how Massachusetts went in 2020, Ed Markey won here by about 33 points. The presidential race in 2024, Kamala Harris won here by something similar, about, 36 points or so in Massachusetts. So no matter how it goes, unless Charlie Baker runs, I fully expect this to be a safe Democratic Senate seat. If Charlie Baker runs, maybe I could see it getting closer to 11 or 12% that I would put it down to likely Democrat, but I don't think that's too likely at this time. I think Massachusetts goes safe Democrat. So that's Massachusetts. Now looking at Michigan, this is a very, very close one. Democratic incumbent Gary Peters was reelected in 2020 in a very close race, actually, against Republican John James by 1.7%. This one was very, very tight. And actually in 2024, Donald Trump won the state of Michigan 49.7 to 48.3 at the Senate race in 2024. This was actually a Democratic win by 0.3% of Elisa Slotkin versus Mike Rogers, the Republican. It really depends how this one ends up going, because if the Republicans put up a good candidate against Gary Peters, this is a very, very capable race of being won by the Republicans. And I would not be shocked one bit to see Michigan be a tilt Republican state on election night, given how close it's been in 2024. However, at this time, there are no confirmed Republicans running for this seat, and we are going to have to wait and see until that goes. Until that happens, I am going to give this race to Gary Peters, the Democratic incumbent, and I'm on the fence between giving it as a lean Democratic state or tilt Democratic state. I'm narrowly giving it in lean right now by about 2 to 3%, but this is going to be a close one to watch on election night as well. Democrats are now at 38, Republicans are at 40. We have the state of Minnesota. This is one-term Democrat Tina Smith, who was elected in 2020 or re-elected following a special election. And In 2024, Republican Senate nominee Royce White has announced his candidacy on the Republican side. I keep clicking, I'm sorry, on the 2024 prediction I did. But in Minnesota, it was about a 5-point win in 2020. I don't think it's likely that we're going to see that again based on how White performed. I'll show you that in 1 second. Minnesota, the presidential level, was a 4-point race. But when it comes to the Senate level, Minnesota ended up going 15 points for Amy Klobuchar over Royce White, the Republican. I think if White is the candidate again, I don't see why things would change much. Minnesota's on the fence between being a safe Democratic state and likely Democratic state. I'll say that he'll do a little bit better and he'll be likely Democrat, but I don't think this race is going to be very competitive in 2026 if White is the nominee once again. Now we have Mississippi, one-term Republican Cindy Hyde-Smith, and it looks like she's running for a second full term in office. I have not heard much about this race being competitive. It was a 10-point win for Hyde-Smith back in 2020. The presidential race was about a, 23-point win, 24-point win in 2024 for Donald Trump. On the Senate level, there was a race. Roger Wicker won here by a lot, by about 30 points or so. So this is certainly going to be a safe Republican state, no question about that, out of Mississippi. Now we have Montana. This is a Republican, two-term incumbent, Steve Daines. And right now, the only potential Democrat candidate being listed is former Representative Riley Neal. He is running for the Democratic nomination. I'm skeptical at how close Montana will be because we did see back in 2020 Steve Daines win by 10 points. The presidential level, Trump won here by 20 points. With the Democratic incumbent Jon Tester, Tim Sheehy was able to win this race by about 7%. Right now, the Republican Steve Daines, he has the incumbency advantage out of Montana. So there really isn't going to be a Democratic advantage out of Montana like there has been in the past. I think with that said, would be enough to put Montana to start off in the likely Republican column. I don't think it'll be safe Republican, but I think likely is certainly a good starting place for this seat. That is Republicans at 42, Democrats 39. Now we move to the state of Nebraska, where two-term Republican incumbent Ben Sasse resigned in the 118th Congress to become president of the University of Florida. Former Governor Pete Ricketts was appointed as interim senator on January 12, 2023, by the current governor of Nebraska, Jim Pillen. He won the special election for the remainder of Sasse's term in 2024. The only potential candidate listed right now for this race is Dan Osborne, who challenged Republican incumbent Deb Fischer in 2024. I'm not really sure if Osborne is going to run for this seat again, and if he does, how well he'll do compared to Deb Fischer, as the governor seems to have a more higher approval rating than her. But we'll still look at Nebraska. Sasse won by about 38 points. Trump won it in 2024 by about 21 points. On the Senate level, Deb Fischer only won here by 6 points, but the special election for Pete Ricketts was very, very big by over about 27 points. So it's looking like in this race, this one won't be close. Nebraska will be a safe Republican seat. Now we get to New Hampshire, where this is one that I think many people would write off as a safe Democratic win, and I'm actually very fascinated by this race because this is three-term Democratic incumbent Jeanne Shaheen, and she has not yet stated if she will run for re-election, but there's been a lot of speculation that she is leaning that way. What really is interesting about this one is former Massachusetts Senator and candidate in 2014 for the Republicans, Scott Brown, is reportedly considering a run for this seat. This would make this race, look, I'll be frank here, if this race is Jeanne Shaheen versus any other Republican, I think it's probably going to be a safe to maybe likely Democratic race. If it's Jeanne Shaheen versus Scott Brown, I think this race is far more competitive and going to be a very expensive one and a very interesting one to watch. And I think Scott Brown, aside from Governor Chris Sununu, is probably the best recruit Republicans could put up in this Senate race for New Hampshire. This is not 2014 anymore. Scott has now lived in New Hampshire at this point for about 12 years. So the Democrats in New Hampshire would use the carpetbagger label against Scott Brown, I'm sure, but it wouldn't really be as much as effective as he has lived there for 12 years now. I think Jeanne Shaheen versus Scott Brown, I do genuinely believe this race is going to happen, and I think it will be a very, very close race. I think Jeanne Shaheen will win again, but I think I'm going to be so bold and say I think she'll win by under 1% of the vote. I think Scott Brown, in every election he's ran in, has outperformed the polls and done better than many expected him to do. Even in 2014, where he did lose, he did almost pull off an upset and win this race against a popular Democratic incumbent. And I think he's going to come within very, very close margins of narrowly doing that again in 2026. This is one where the polls may not show this, but I think the polls may be wrong, and Scott comes very close to pulling an upset. So this is certainly one in New Hampshire I'm keeping a very close eye on. Out of the state of New Jersey, two-term Democratic incumbent Cory Booker was reelected in 2020, and he is running again for reelection to a third full term. I did it again, actually, before I move on. Let me show you. In 2020, Jeanne Shaheen won the seat by 15.6%. In 2024, the seat was won by Kamala Harris over Donald Trump by just 3%. So New Hampshire showed at the presidential level it is still very, very close and capable of being a swing state once again. And there was not a Senate race in 2024 out of New Hampshire. But for New Jersey, it was a 6-point race at the presidential level in 2024 this time around. Back in 2020, Cory Booker won the seat by about 16 points. This is going to be a very, very interesting to watch for. A Democratic senator is a lot different than Kamala Harris and Donald Trump in the presidential election. So I do think New Jersey has gone a little bit more Republican, but I think Cory Booker will still win here by at least probably 10 to 11%, but I'm putting it in likely Democrat for now. Now we have Democratic incumbent senator out of New Mexico, Ben Ray Lujan. He was first elected in 2020, and he won by about 6.1% against Republican Mark Ronchetti. This is going to be a very interesting one to watch because at the presidential level, this was a 6-point race as well in 2024. And looking at the Senate map, the Democrat Martin Heinrich defeated his Republican challenger by about 10 points. So in every instance I showed you of these three races out of New Mexico, they were all under 15%, but they're all over 5%, which would be enough to put New Mexico to start off in the likely Democratic column. But that is one that could potentially get very, very close. Now we come to one of the closest races in the entire country in 2026, and this is a very fascinating one for me as well. This is the state of North Carolina, where two-term Republican incumbent Thom Tillis is running for re-election against potentially current governor and outgoing governor of North Carolina, Roy Cooper. And this is going to be a very fascinating race because from everything I've seen, Roy Cooper's approval ratings in North Carolina are very high right now. So this is certainly one that could be very, very close. Now, there are some rumblings that Thom Tillis may potentially be primaried on the Republican side by someone more conservative and more loyal to the president-elect Donald Trump. So this is something I'm watching very, very closely, and this is one that I think potentially Democrats could look for a potential flip here. North Carolina, I very well could see being a tilt Democratic win. I could also see North Carolina being a tilt Republican win. And right now, I'm going to put North Carolina as tilt Republican. This is a race that's very, very close, and I think right now Thom Tillis does start out as a favorite to win this race in a very, very close one, because the polls often show North Carolina being a close race, even with the Democrats leading sometimes. And as we saw back in 2020, Thom Tillis ended up winning here by 1.7%, even outperforming President Trump's margin in this state. And we saw in 2024 the state going 3 points Republican for Trump over Harris, and there was not a Senate election in 2024, but Ted Budd did win in 2022 by a lean Republican margin. North Carolina is one where I think Democrats are going to be very confident in, potentially overconfident in winning, and I honestly would not blame them. But I think history is telling us in North Carolina that every time a Republican senator like Thom Tillis has been in danger in North Carolina, he's pulled off an upset and won, and I see no reason to change that prediction now. Even with Roy Cooper running for this seat, it could potentially be a Rick Scott situation in 2018, but for now, I'm keeping Thom Tillis as a narrow winner in North Carolina, but certainly that's a very close one to watch for. Now we have the Ohio special election. This is going to be the fill the seat of Senator J.D. Vance, who is now going to be the vice president serving with Donald Trump. And there is a million possibilities for which Republican will be the next senator of Ohio, depending on who Governor Mike DeWine will appoint as interim successor. We've heard names such as Vivek Ramaswamy. We've heard some past candidates like Matt Dolan and some candidates like Josh Mandel and Jamie Tinkin. There are many people that could run for the seat on the Republican side. On the Democratic side, we've heard former Democratic nominee for this seat in 2022 and Democratic presidential candidate Tim Ryan could be interested in running for this seat. Senator outgoing of Ohio, Sherrod Brown, maybe could express interest in running for the seat. So there are 2 or 3 options on the Democratic side that would make this race very competitive. The only drawback is this time neither Democrat is in office, so they don't have an incumbency advantage. And I would expect this race, based on the result in 2022, where Vance won this race by about 6 points. And now looking at the 2024 presidential race, Donald Trump won it by about 11 points. So I would expect, oh, I forgot one more, I'm sorry. Bernie Moreno defeated Sherrod Brown by 4 points at the Senate level. I do expect this race will be a Republican win. The question is going to be, is it a likely win? Is it a lean win? I think right now it starts off as likely, but very, very borderline, probably by about 5 or 6%. But Ohio is going to be a fascinating one to watch for as well. Oklahoma, I only think this race is going to be very interesting if Republican incumbent Markwayne Mullin is primaried out by a more conservative Republican. Oklahoma is one of the most Republican states in the entire country. Inhofe won it in 2020 by about 30 points. Looking at the presidential race, it was won by about 34 points by Donald Trump. There was no Senate race in 2024. I fully expect Oklahoma will be a safe Republican state. Oregon, this 3-term Democratic incumbent Jeff Merkley, he is running for a 4th term. This race in Oregon was won by Merkley by 17.6% back in 2020. The presidential race this time around in Oregon was a win of 15%. I fully expect this race is going to be a safe Democratic win. That has Democrats at 43, Republicans at 46. Now we have Rhode Island. 5-term Democrat Jack Reed was re-elected in 2020. He is running for a 6th term. Rhode Island did swing a little bit to the right. I keep clicking the wrong thing. Rhode Island did swing to the right a little bit in 2024. Reed won by 33 points back in 2020. This time around, Harris defeated Trump by about 14%. So it has swung to the right a little bit, or actually by a drastic number, but still at about a 14-point win for Harris would not be enough for me to put Rhode Island out of the safe Democratic column at this time. I think the Democrats get another one there. Then it puts the Democrats at 44, Republicans at 46. South Carolina, this is 4-term Republican and Senator Lindsey Graham. Some potential primary news here. Representative Ralph Norman has been listed as potential challenger for Lindsey Graham. Representative Nancy Mace has also been mentioned. The Democrats do have the 2022 Senate candidate Catherine Fleming Bruce has filed a run for this race out of South Carolina. In 2020, Graham did win by about 10.3%. 2024, Trump won the state by 18% at the presidential level. So Graham has been the more vulnerable of all the Republicans in South Carolina for a long time, which is a little bit bold saying I do think Graham, if he wins, will win this race, but I do think he will win by under 15% in the likely Republican column. Republicans now have 47, Democrats have 44. South Dakota, this is 2-term Republican incumbent Mike Rounds, and there's really not too much to talk about here. Rounds won back in 2020 by about 31 points. Trump won the state by about, honestly, the same 31 points in 2024. That would certainly put South Dakota into the safe Republican column. Tennessee, this is 1-term Republican Bill Hagerty. He's likely going to be running for re-election in 2026. And in 2020, Hagerty won by about 27 points. Trump won the state this time around by about 30 points in 2024. I see no reason why Tennessee won't be a safe Republican state. I also am now realizing I think I missed the state of Arkansas. Yes, I did. This is 2-term incumbent Senator Tom Cotton. He ran, I believe, against an independent candidate in 2020. I don't believe he had a Democratic challenger. If my memory serves me, that is correct. He won by 33 points. Trump won the state by about 30 points in 2024. I don't see any reason why Arkansas will be competitive. I also realized I missed the state of Delaware. Oh man, I am missing everything. Delaware. This is 2-term incumbent Chris Coons. He won, I just realized now, by about 21.5 points back in 2020. The presidential level, it went for Harris over Trump by about 15 points. Delaware is going to be a safe Democratic state in 2026. Okay, so that is how things go there. The state of Florida, this is going to be a special election to fill the remainder of Marco Rubio's term. And there's a lot of options for this race. We could potentially see Byron Donalds, Representative Byron Donalds, maybe some representatives like Matt Gaetz or Pam Bondi. We're going to have to wait and see who may run for this seat in Florida. But Florida's become much more of a Republican state. In 2022, Marco Rubio won the state by 16.4%. The presidential race, Donald Trump won it by 13 points. Rick Scott won the Senate race by about the same, by 13 points. I don't see any reason other to say Florida is either going to be a likely Republican state or a safe Republican state. For now, I'm going to say likely, but I could certainly see it bumping up to safe. But for now, I'll go with likely. Republicans are now at 51. Democrats are at 45. Texas is going to be very fascinating because four-term Republican John Cornyn has indicated he's running for a fifth term, but there are some rumored Republican primary challengers, such as Representative Ronnie Jackson and Republican Attorney General Ken Paxton, all interested they are running. So a primary challenge could potentially happen out of the state of Texas. On the Democratic side, U.S. Representative Beth Van Dyne from the 24th District could potentially be running, as well as Texas Land Commissioner Don Buckingham. So this is going to be a very, very fascinating thing to watch for in Texas. I do expect in 2020 the state going for Cornyn by about 9.6%, Trump winning the state by about 14% in 2024, Ted Cruz winning the state by about 8%. I do think Texas will go red in 2026, but I'm not putting it over 15%. I think it would be a likely Republican state at this time, with the potential to be a lean Republican state if Cornyn's primaried, but for now, I'm going to put it as likely Republican. Finishing out quickly now, we have the states of Virginia, West Virginia, and Wyoming. Virginia, this is Democratic incumbent Mark Warner. This race is really going to be all contingent on if Governor Glenn Youngkin is going to run for the seat. If Youngkin does run, I think it could be very competitive. If he does not run, I think right now Mark Warner starts out as about a favorite to win it and a safe to likely margin. This state was about a 12-point win for Warner back in 2020. Harris versus Trump, it was only a 6-point win. This time around for Tim Kaine versus Hung Kao, it was about an 8-point win. So I do think this race is going to be a likely Democratic win for Mark Warner. West Virginia, Republican Shelley Moore Capito won this state. He or she is running for re-election. Depending on if she wins or not, will be a primary challenger. That remains to be seen. But Trump won this state by over 30 points, almost 40 points, over 40 points. Very, very big win, and about a 43-point win back in 2020. This will be a safe Republican state. Lastly, Wyoming, one-term Republican Cynthia Lummis is up for re-election. I believe she is running. Again, Trump won the state, very big totals. And back in 2020, it was a 45-point win. This state will go Republican. So my very way too early prediction for 2026 right now has Republicans winning 54 Senate seats, Democrats winning 46, with some very competitive races going on in Michigan, in Georgia, in North Carolina, and in New Hampshire. These are the close areas I'm watching right now. That will do it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to give it a like. And if you really liked it, please remember to click the subscribe button. And make sure you turn post notifications on so you always get notified when I post a new video. That way you never miss one. Also, please remember to share this video with your friends and family if you really, really, really like the video. And remember to stay tuned because I'll be posting at least one video every single day leading up until Election Day. So I'd really appreciate it if you keep coming back and watching those videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in a future video.